Hello and welcome to FI for Kids, the show about guiding your kids on the path to financial independence and extraordinary lives. I'm your host, Dominic DeLaquil. Our guest today is Rob Finlay. Rob is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, as well as a seasoned entrepreneur, but he sees his most important role as dad. In fact, the recipient of many late-night, "Hey Dad, how do I?" calls, he was inspired to write his latest book, Hey Dad, a practical, entertaining guide for young adults to thrive in life. Welcome, Rob, and thanks for coming on the show.
Dominic, thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with you just telling us a little bit about your background, what you learned about money when you were growing up.
So for me, I think I learned money, when I grew up. My parents taught me, okay, if you're going to do some work, you got some money, but as later on, you're going to have to provide your own money. You're going to have to go get a job and you're going to have to pay for things. And so it all comes down to it. I think where my hardest time with money was when I was out of the house and I didn't have that security blanket around me and I didn't know how to budget. I didn't know anything about financial freedom or financial independence. And, I'd buy things that I couldn't afford and I didn't know how to budget and I didn't know how to plan. And it was really a dark side of my life because I think as anybody can attest, being in that stage where you don't have financial control is debilitating to your life. You can't have happiness if you're worried about everything else.
When we talked before, you said that so your dad was in business, right? He was an entrepreneur, is that right?
Yes. Yeah, he was real estate and entrepreneur and then became real estate.
Didn't you say you knew, you knew terms, right? You understood stuff from Barron's, but didn't really put it together what it meant. Is that right?
Absolutely. I enjoyed it. There was actually a time, just because of my age, where the movie Wall Street, not The Wolf of Wall Street, but Wall Street, which probably wasn't as great either, but it was very popular. And back when I was in college, people dreamed about going to Wall Street, working in a pit, working as a trader. And so my dad gave me this book. It was Barron's book. It was the Encyclopedia of Financial Terms. And this thick book, it was only, it's almost like a size of a small box, but it had all these terms in it and I would read it and study it. So, I knew everything from like arbitrage to, reverse repos, but yet I couldn't save a dollar. So it didn't mean anything because I didn't know how to apply it.
It's interesting on a couple levels. In that movie, by the way, for people who don't know it, Michael Douglas won an Oscar for that, for his Gordon Gekko role. Charlie Sheen was in it, Martin Sheen. Yeah. So anyway, so it's interesting. You had that interest, wanted to learn all these terms, but then still sounds like a lot of the classical mistakes that a lot of us have made when we're younger, because you didn't know how to apply it.
Yeah, or even older, Dominic, right? You look at it now. How much noise is coming in from all sides, right? Social media, I was just looking at it a little before, and I've got a Bloomberg sitting up here and I'm watching that all day long. And yet here I am getting this, somebody on Instagram who's toting, some new stock. And it's like, who is this person, right? So, it's like, and talking about special terms, like he was talking about some type of derivative structure, like, how do you even know what that is, right? It's like, are you just making up stuff to increase your influencer? So really having that perspective, and I'll tell you, I think our kids sort of struggle with that as well, because there's this absolute sort of lack of reality in what they're reading and seeing from social media versus what's real in real life.
We're all of us so inundated with so much information and so many things trying to grab our attention. And as an adult, hopefully you've acquired some sense of how to differentiate what's valid information and what's not, or what's misinformation, or whatever. But as kids, I think there's just more information now where that's harder because they just don't have the life experience to have a good way all the time to ascertain, hey, is that good information or is it junk? Which actually probably sort of fits in well with the book. Well, we should circle back around to that technology piece and this social media stuff when we get into talking about the book. But before we do that, so that was kind of your background. What approach did you take with your kids when they were growing up? You've got 4 kids, right?
4 kids, right? So it was all about budgeting. And at first they were all like, oh, budget, I don't want to budget. It's, as bad. And in fairness, I have 4. So for those of you who have multiple kids, right, they're all different. Some are very receptive to this kind of financial freedom. Some of them like going to the free ATM and trying to get money that way. So it all comes down to, your kid, but really putting it into perspective. But one of the things that really was eye-opening to me with my kids was they don't realize what everything costs and also everything that's out there, right? So it was almost like, I think there was like an Ellen DeGeneres show, or sort of funny, where they were asking Bill Gates, like they had him do like The Price is Right. And they would hold up something from the grocery store, and he would have to guess how much it was. Now, Bill Gates hasn't been to the grocery store in a long time, so he has no idea. But that's sort of the same analogy that I would put with my kids, right? It's like, okay, well, you've got a cell phone. Okay, well, yeah, I know a new iPhone costs $800. Like, well, what about your unlimited data and all your, all that kind of stuff? What about your car insurance, right? Your car is one thing, your car insurance. I think you and I talked about, like, what about your tires? What about your brakes? What about your maintenance? What about your registration? All of this stuff adds up. And when they get to see that clear picture, though, at first they're like, oh God, this is horrible, this is horrible, this is horrible. But then all of a sudden they see, wait a second, I actually now at least have some visualization. I have a path to be able to live within my means. And now it just gives me a better perspective. So my big thing, back to that initial question, was I really focused on budget, but budget in the optimum side, which is, it's a positive thing. Having financial freedom is positive. It's the best thing in your life.
If you don't understand what's going on with your money, I mean, it's just like having a business. In every business, or every functioning successful business, they know where their cash flow is, because the cash flow is the lifeblood, and you've got to be bringing in more than you're spending. And it's the same with each of us as individuals. You've got to be earning more. You got to have more income than your expenses. And it's easy to get lopsided on that. And by the time, if you're not paying attention, by the time you figure it out, now you're in debt. Usually that means credit card debt, which is high interest, hard to get out of. And now it's especially frustrating because you got to dig out of a hole before you start to put anything aside and see, oh man, this is kind of cool that I can see this grow. It's not as hard as I thought. So yeah, you can't move towards financial stability or financial freedom without knowing what's going on with your money. So I think that's great. So how do they take that?
I think they were really good. I think once they saw it, I think they were actually really good. Now, in reality, it comes down to when, well, you can spend 20% to 25% of your income on a car. Well, when that backs into, that's not a brand new Mercedes or BMW, that's actually, something that's quite less than that, that becomes a little bit more of an eye opener for them. But ultimately, at least they're starting to take control. And I think that's really the key point about being a young adult, is that you're actually an adult. You're actually taking responsibility for yourself. You're actually responsible for your actions, and you're out on your own. And so having that is, you know what? This car might be an old Honda or an old whatever, but it's mine. I bought it. And they take pride, and that confidence in that is, so pride and confidence I sort of use similarly, but that they're now becoming confident humans. So it really worked out well, but it is hard because sometimes you have to get them in the right place, right? The right frame of mind, because your kids, if you start talking to them, you know how it can go, right? It can go either way, right? It's like, okay, well, what about this? What about this? Dad, I don't want to think about this. I don't want to, Dad, I don't know. So it really is up to the parent early on to try to put in some life lessons. Watch things, let them have this natural curiosity of where money goes and where money comes in.
Yeah, we're actually in the midst of that right now with our daughter, right? She's 16 and she's thinking about, and she's been working for almost a year, and she's always been pretty good with her money. She's not a big spender, so she's been able to put quite a bit of money away. And now she's thinking, well, I kind of, maybe I want to get a car. But then she's looking at cars that are like way out of her range, and then she's asking, well, can you just loan me the money? And we're like, well, no, we're not doing that. Like, we've talked already about some of the things that you need to sort of be thinking about, right? Which is insurance, and you got to have some money set aside because you're going to get a used car. You might need repairs, all that sort of stuff. And it's like she understands it, but then forgets about it. So, and she got a little upset at first when we're like, no, we're not doing that. So, but then she fairly quickly got herself under control and, and is more open now to having a conversation. So it was kind of cool to see that initial, like, she got a little bent out of shape because it wasn't what she envisioned and wanted, but she quickly kind of got herself back around to reality and then was kind of looking in a more appropriate stuff that sort of fit where she's at and what would make sense for her in a better way. So that was kind of cool to see that. So, I mean, we're still early on in that process because she's really not quite ready, but she's looking. And so, but it'll be interesting to see how that pans out over the next, I don't know, 3-6 months or so. So exactly kind of what you're talking about.
Are you going to ever try to get a loan for it?
So my initial reaction is I'd rather not, but there can be some benefit to that, right? So if she wants to do a loan, then there's also something she learns about doing that. And then there's also a tie-in that she doesn't understand yet, which is, well, then someone has to co-sign. So you've got real responsibility here. And it can also help for her to start to build some credit. So we're not completely opposed to it. But so we'll kind of see what she can find and what she wants to do and kind of, again, we'll have conversations about it as we go and kind of guide her. And ultimately, I think probably let her make the choice. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's where I come back to. These are great learning experiences for your child, right? It's because nothing's more, it's one thing telling them about, hey, in life, you're not going to be able to spend this, you're not going to be spending this. Their car, and especially their first car, is something that they want, right? So they're very motivated by what they want. And I would see this as a wonderful learning experience, like, because you're going to hold their attention because there's gratification for listening to dad about, hey, look, you want to buy this car? Let's look at it. Okay, so the first stage is how much can you afford? So that's budgeting. How much? Okay, let's go out now and let's figure out how much you can borrow. And so let's look at how you do a loan and loan payments. And yeah, she's not going to get the whole thing, but she's going to start learning bits and pieces and the difference between saying, hey, go out and look at a credit union or go look at a bank and see having that loan. And then ultimately, which I think is probably just as valuable of a lesson, is the actual purchase of the car. Right? I promote a huge section in my book about buying a car, and I had these two great guys, the father son, run a company called Car Edge, and they're all about buying used cars. The son is a young technical kid, and the father is a 50-year used car salesman vet, and he's telling you all the things to watch out for. And so having her go into that experience of the thing that kids don't really do well is going outside of mom and dad and actually having to communicate and negotiate and be that. So it's a wonderful learning experience for a young adult.
They're not going to get all of it, but every little bit that they do start to get is beneficial because that's how they start to now build that knowledge base and build the big concept understandings that then as they continue to go through life, they can add more detail to and continue to flesh out and improve their understanding and get more savvy and sophisticated about things. And that's kind of the fun part, right? Is sort of seeing all those things happen.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, it's funny. I was asked a question from a child development person, like, what's one of the most important things that a young adult could learn? And I said, compounding. He said, well, no, I'm not talking about financial. And I said, I wasn't talking about financial. I said, yeah, I understand that, from a financial standpoint, yes, compounding is very important, but compounding also has to do with making improvement in your life. A little bit of something every day or over time and on top of itself will create incredible compounded results by learning a skill or learning something. And it's just compounding is incredible. And there's the same thing with being a good friend or being healthy. A little bit of exercise every day compounds into great results.
Yeah. And, I couldn't agree with that more, although I never thought of it in that context. I've been thinking and talking a lot for the last several years just about the importance of consistency. Because just with your own health, so exercise, eating, trying to get enough sleep, all those things, it's all about consistency over time. Same with your money, right? So much of that is about consistency over time. And we all see stories and this person was an overnight success or they got rich quick, and that's almost never the case. There's this whole under the water part of the iceberg of all of this work and effort and consistent effort over time that leads to success in whatever area it is. So I never thought of it in terms of compounding before, but that makes great sense. It's everything. So that's cool. So let's talk about the book then. I'd like you to tell the story from the intro that I think sets up the overall inspiration for the book nicely. And I I got a kick out of it when I read it. Just made me chuckle. As soon as the word green showed up, I'm like, oh. Anyway, so, but it's you're talking about things in there, and you've got your words of wisdom or advice. Also, you've got several chapters in there on different topics, and almost all of those touch on money in one way or the other. Some more than others, but almost all of them touch on money, which I just think is an important part too, because money touches pretty much every aspect of our life. So, but you also talk to experts in those different things. Like you just gave the example talking about getting a car, right? You talk to a father-son who that's what they do. So it's not just your knowledge base and your thoughts on subjects. You're talking to other people in here to get their experts in whatever the topic is.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the book, to tell you that story of how it started. I just finished my first book, and it was on innovation in commercial real estate, right? And so unless you're in commercial real estate and finance, and you're probably not going to pick it up. But I enjoyed the process of writing a book, and I have 4 young adults between the ages of 20 and 28, and my life for the past 28 years has been, hey, Dad, how do I do this? And as they've gotten older, it's become that. And one moment was in the middle of the night. I get a phone call, and as any parent can relate, a phone call from your child in the middle of the night is the thing we dread the most. Like that is that is the worst call. So I jump out, my heart's racing. I grab the phone, I look at it, it's my daughter. I'm like, oh my God, what's wrong? I'm panting, I can't even breathe. It's that bad. And she's on the other side, just almost like annoyed, like I've taken so long, I've taken 2 rings. And by the way, this is like 1 o'clock in the morning. So it's not like it's 10:15, but in 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, what's wrong? She's like, can I put the green gas in my Jeep? And I had to come back a little bit, right? Because yeah, I mean, blood pressure, adrenaline, all that. I'm like, what are you saying? She's like, and she was annoyed now because she had to ask the question again. She said, hey, Dad, can I put the green gas in my Jeep? I'm like, are you asking if you can put diesel in your Jeep? And your Jeep is gasoline. So I'm like, I'm struggling here. And she's like, yeah, now she's super annoyed. Yes, can I put the green gas in? I'm like, absolutely not. So we finally, and there's more to a story of that. There was a reason why there was that case, and there was a shortage on gas on the East Coast. But still, the whole point was, at that moment, I was like, have I not taught her that? Have I not taught all of my kids sort of what they need to know? And talking with other parents, we sort of get all these, we commiserate and we hear all these stories about this. And so I was like, yeah, you know what? There's really something there. Then finally, because I started tossing and turning about it, my wife was like, you know what? Why don't you just write a book on all the hey dad stuff that you get? And so that's exactly what I did. I said, it's a great idea. So for the next year, I basically went out and researched. I wrote about what I thought was a foundational core of what every young person needs to know, either graduating from high school or graduating college, on how to be an adult. And I said, well, because kids aren't going to listen to me, and everything I know you could write down in like 2 pages. So why don't I go out and interview people that had real expertise, real credibility? And this was Navy SEALs on emergencies. I have maintaining your car from a professional NASCAR driver, the Daytona 500 race car driver winner, and his crew chief. Right? Who knows better how to maintain a car, and who knows more how to beat up a car than a race car driver and a crew chief? Talking about insurance people, taxes, banking, paramedics, everybody in between. A woman who runs one of the largest apartment companies in the country. Everybody, just to get their perspective. And it was really, I then took it and I said, you know what? I'm just going to make it easy, consumable, not preaching. Actually add a little bit of humor to it, because in fairness,
Yeah.
life can be pretty funny, right? If you let it. It could be very depressing if you let it, but I choose the opposite. I choose to be a little bit happy. So, and that was it. And that became the book of what is launched as Hey Dad, everything you should know but don't about being an adult.
It just came out recently, right?
Yeah, it just actually, I was just up in New York at the official launch and book signing at Barnes and Noble. And so, yeah, that was last Tuesday. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And so I've only gotten through a tiny little bit, but I like it so far. It's not overly large, right? So people are like, oh, is it going to be this like heavy, dense sort of thing? And it's not that, right? Like you said, it's lighthearted, but there's also, information from people in there, stories about stuff. So at least the part that I've been through so far, it's an easy read, it's an informative read, and it's good. I mean, I've enjoyed it so far. Today's episode is sponsored by the Singleton Foundation for Financial Literacy and Entrepreneurship. Using the power of storytelling and entertainment to make learning about finances and entrepreneurship fun and engaging, the Singleton Foundation has a variety of free programs available to everyone. Million Stories is a video channel with over 30 short series. Groove is a goal-setting and financial learning app. Slingshot is an app to help you develop your business idea, and Venture Valley is an esports-style video game. You can learn more about all of these free, engaging, and entertaining programs by visiting singletonfoundation.org. Thanks to the Singleton Foundation for helping to improve financial understanding, skills, and habits for everyone, and for sponsoring this episode.
well, good. Well, I appreciate that. No, look, the feedback has been very positive, and which is always nice to hear. And it's also when it was out and it's pre-advanced, and we pre-released it to a bunch of people for just to see what kind of results and stuff. And it was interesting. I think what people found the most was it's not preachy. It's not very, there are details where it matters, like budgeting, like what percentages and stuff like that. But it's not generally. We're just trying to get the information passed from one group to another. But what was really interesting about it was the people who read the book, they basically said, the best thing about this is it's a great gift. And what we're doing is we're actually adding in some of the things, some of the advice that we want and that we want to make sure that they know, because it is important. And it's important that they're passing their knowledge onto that group. So it was really, that's actually made it very special for me now.
One of the things that you mention in the book, and this is, I think, an interesting subject, because I think every parent struggles with this to one extent or the other, is you mentioned, that one of the reasons you were talking to experts and stuff is because your kids aren't going to listen to you, right? Not in the same way. And I think we've all experienced that. So as a parent, especially when your kids are still at home, we all worry, like, man, are they going to get any of this? Is any of this getting through? And I think it's helpful to get the feedback from parents that have been at it longer. Like, no, you just have to be patient. You plant the seeds, you do the best they can. They're going to get things, I think, in their own time, but they do get things. So I guess my question would be, talk about that a little bit, just in terms of your experience, but also if you've got the book hasn't been out very long, so you probably haven't had a lot of feedback on this, but I'd just be curious if taking the different chapters in there and the different topics, if parents find that, well, I've talked to my kids about these things, but they didn't really listen or didn't get it, but we went through this together, or they read this section afterwards and then something clicked. So just maybe speak to both those things as best you can.
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple of things to unpack there. So one, your kids don't really listen to you, right? And so, they have a great filter what they want to. If it impacts them and is beneficial to them, they'll listen to that. Dad, you said if I did this, you were going to give me $10. They will remember that forever, right? But if you said, hey, go get a job, they're going to forget that, or clean up your room. So I think, in fairness, one of the ways that I think parents can be very successful in teaching these lessons is having a good network of people around you that are also adults, or people that your kids can talk to freely, because I think that is a real important thing. Is that, my kids, I have a good friend of mine, and my kids like to talk to him. They'll talk to him about things they won't talk to me about, right? It's like, Dad doesn't know because Dad doesn't know anything, right? And so they'll talk to them, they'll ask him, and they will listen to him. And I'm so happy for that. At first, I was like, geez, you know what? I don't want this guy. Who's this guy? I know he's my best friend. I trust him with everything. But, why is he, he's giving me this, he's talking to my kids. But yet his kids come to me and talk to me, and I'm happy to give them my advice. And so it comes down to, you're going to get that. Your kids need to have places around that they can at least talk to adults. And that also is sort of a secondary lesson, which is being able to talk to adults and network and communicate effectively with adults is a critical life skill that every young adult must have. They don't typically have it, but they must have it and must learn it. But having those people around to do it is really good. I think when it comes to the book, yes, the book can help open up dialogue. Hey, this is what this expert says. It gives you every part of the book is going to be something that you as a parent will face with your child, no matter what, right? They're going to come out of school. They're not going to know what to do. Okay, let's look at that. That's section 1. Hey, your kids are going to go get an apartment. Okay, let's go get your kid. Hopefully, is going to get a job. Well, let's read this and let's look at this and let's diagnose this a little bit better. And if you have questions or something, talk to other people or do a little bit of research. But it's giving you that direction, right? It's sort of boiling you down the funnel to get to the answers. I think the biggest thing that you want is that you want to be able to guide your children to get the advice from the right source, right? We go back to that stuff of, I love social media, so I don't want to come off as a bashing social media. I love social media. I think it's fun. I think it's entertaining, but I don't necessarily get my information from it, right? And so knowing, especially on things like investments or, really big decisions, I think that's better off with knowing who the resource is that's giving you that information. So using the book that way to foster the communication, I think is helpful. So it's not like you saying, okay, you've got to go do this, 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 and this. You can say, hey, let's read this. And by the way, in the book, as you probably know, every end of chapter has this section on too long, didn't read. So, right, it basically tells you, here's the 5 things you need to know about this chapter, and that can start the communication.
That should be helpful for people. Because it is good to have other ways to help stimulate conversations or a way to bring in reliable information, like you said. And also, you bring up a great point that it is important for kids to have other adults to talk to, because they do talk to them in different ways. So I was the youngest of 5, and by quite a big margin. And so I think back on it now, and I realize, I'm sure my parents thought I wasn't listening to anything they were saying, although I always thought that I was. I actually put a lot of faith in what they were telling me. But I also talked to my older brother a lot. I talked to my brother-in-law, who I was really close to. He was 10 years older than me. And then other people too, other adults that I knew. But it was helpful to go, because it's a different perspective. They were younger than my parents, obviously. And you can talk to them in a way that's a little bit different. Or even if it's your grandparents, right? And you're talking to them in a way that's maybe different from your parents, whoever it might be for each kid. I do think that stuff I agree with you completely. I think there's a lot of value there. And I think parents should encourage that, with adults that they know to be reliable, trustworthy sources of information that are going to have their kids' best interest at heart. So
Right, exactly. And it comes out, and for those who don't have that, because not everybody has that, and that's okay, because there are ways to get that, right? There are places where there's a lot of mentorship available for people who have questions in a safe environment. But you're right. I mean, look, and the thing with this too is what's really important. Here's where parents need to understand: when your child or young adult goes from that transition from being dependent to independent, therefore they've graduated and are now moving on to their adult life, you now are no longer really that parent. You've become that older brother or that brother-in-law who's 10 years older, right? And that's what you need. Your job now is not to criticize and critique. It's about, hey, okay, yeah, you should go do that. Or, hey, you know what? Hey, this is what, have you thought about this? You've become a guide. You've become a mentor, an advocate for your kid. You're no longer that, you're always the parent. You're always the parent. But You are not the one who's saying, "Oh, hey, what did you eat this morning? Hey,
Yeah.
did you clean up your room?" You're not that anymore. So
I think that's also a really good point, because I think that is true, or it should be true, right? Your job then is to be a resource of information. Hey, Dad, right? You're getting calls all the time. Hey, how do I do this? Or what about? And I think that's important. And also to kind of guide and nudge them. And hopefully you've established enough of a relationship and you planted enough seeds, even though you thought, man, these things are never taking root when they're younger because they're giving you the eye roll and the attitude, that now that they are actually responsible for themselves, now you can have conversations and help them work through the critical thinking so that they can decide for themselves what's the best decision for them. Now, maybe it's not the decision that you as the parent would make, but you also should be able to, hopefully, if they're thinking it through, even though you wouldn't make the same decision, but their logic is sound, or even if you think it's a mistake, but it's not too big of a mistake, you can be like, well, okay, you just have to be supportive of that stuff, right? And let them figure it out, and they learn from those things, so long as it's not, again, something so big that it's devastating or life-threatening in some way. I mean, hopefully by the time they're young adults, they've moved past that. But
right, well, this is right. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, they're young adults. They're an adult that is graduated from college. They're going on. It's time, and so they are going to make mistakes. My mom has a great saying: "The world will teach our children." Right, and yes, our job as parents is to say, yeah, that's great. And your young adult will make emotional decisions and non-emotional decisions, right? And so, emotional decisions don't necessarily register with the practical parent, right? Start talking about budgets. It's like, hey, my daughter came, she's like, I'm going to adopt a dog. I'm adopting a dog, Dad. I'm like, that's wonderful because I love dogs. We have dogs, and dogs are a big part of my life. Wonderful. But have you added in vet bills, the doggy daycare, all the stuff that goes into it? And I'm like, well, I applaud your emotion, like you're wanting to help and adopt a dog, which I think is wonderful. Yes, if you can financially do it, yes, please do it. But if you can't, okay, let's make sure, because you don't want that to happen in your life where you're taking on a financial burden that you cannot manage or will jeopardize you for a long period of time. And so what are the consequences? Let's write down the budget. How does it impact us? Okay, that's going to be really tight. Why don't we do this? Maybe could you volunteer at the shelter for a little bit in order to, you're giving them back, or doing you're in social media marketing and stuff like that. Let's help them let these dogs out and help promote these dogs, get these dogs adopted, and you'll look to save money. And when you can make a little bit more money, then maybe it makes better financial sense. Didn't matter. She didn't listen to me. She got the dog anyways. But at the end of the day, and grandpa now, I've become a grandpa to a 2-year-old terrier. It is what it is, right?
yeah, well, I mean, but you had the conversation, you gave the advice, and then she makes her choice, and then you support her, and you go from there. Yeah, I mean, and that's how it is for all of us, right? I mean, it's not like even when you're an adult that's in middle age, every decision that we make isn't perfect. So, you make mistakes and you learn from them, and that's how you, over time, hopefully develop some level of wisdom. But a lot of that is built on, you know what, now that I see that, I would have done that differently. But you didn't know that at the time. So.
Yep. Yeah, I talk about that in my book. I was like talking about like financial. One of my biggest mistakes in the beginning was I bought a house and had unrealistic expectations of my capabilities to renovate a house. Right, so I was trying to make the right business decision. I thought this was a great business. I'm going to buy an old house and I'm going to fix it up. And because practical sense of real estate, buying location, and I did. But lo and behold, without that practical ability to actually realizing that I don't have those carpentry skills and plumbing skills and all the other skills that are required to renovate a house, ends up to be a financial disaster and really impairment to my financial life.
So let's talk about a couple of the financial chapters, and maybe just give us some examples or just your thoughts on, I mean, we've talked a fair amount about budgeting and how important that is. Maybe you've got a chapter in there on investing. Talk a little bit about what some of the advice was in that chapter. And who did you, I haven't gotten to that chapter yet. That's chapter 5 or 6, I think. Who did you talk to for that?
So I spoke to a woman who is a financial planner and advisor at Fidelity, and Ryan Victorian, and she is like this, guru. She's been doing this. She handles a lot of families and stuff. And so she was great because she was very practical about it. And I think one of the things when you start getting into investing for kids, you have to think about it. Even as an adult, I start looking at this stuff, and it's a full-time job looking at numbers and looking at stock markets. Now, if you don't really understand it, right, you can tell your kids, a stock is equity and a bond is debt. And you might as well talk some new thing on TikTok, right? It means nothing, right? That says, okay, great. And then what's an ETF? And then what's this? And what's all of this? And there's some general lack of true understanding of investment principles. And I think that's why, so in the book, yes, I did financial, right, budgeting, but you're absolutely right. Having an understanding of making investment and why it's important to make investments early, back to that compounding that we spoke about before, that's where it's at, right? So being able to understand, but one of my daughters like, why do I want to, this 401k, I don't want to do this. It's like, they're going to take my money. But they're going to take your money and invest it. But no, that's too risky. Like, no, stop. So it comes back to the perception versus reality, right? And they're trying to get this stuff, and they're trying to drink from a fire hose. Don't forget, your 401k, when you're asking those 401k questions, by the way, it also comes down to those tax forms that you have to fill out when they're asking you, hey, Dad, do I have any dependents? It's like things like that, right? And then it's also, hey, I just got this job. What do I wear? How do I do this? How do I do? So think about how overwhelming that is for a young person, or anybody for that matter, right? You're going into unknown territory. So sitting down with them and talking about the basics of financial, sort of how investments work, why they're really good. And that's why I use words like, you talk about interest, on credit cards. I use the word good interest and bad interest, right? There's good interest is somebody's paying you. Bad interest is money you're paying people. Now, obviously, as you get more sophisticated, there's positive arb and all this other stuff, and you can go crazy on financial stuff. But in reality, that's all they need to think about right now is like, okay, so you don't need to be right. Yeah, you're going to get 4 or 5% on their savings, but if you're paying 28% on your credit card, that's okay. Let's pay that off, right? Student loans. A lot of people now are talking out. Now they're making kids pay their student loans back, and that's a heck of a thing, right? You've basically haven't had to make a payment on your student loan for the last few years, and now all of a sudden you're going to have to start doing that. Well, you got to remember that's taking a bite out of the apples. Just back to that, and that comes down to the same thing. Yeah, you're making money in the stock market. Are you making enough money to come? Is that better or worse than what you're paying out? So it's just easy concepts for them. Then let them basic stuff. I started with my kids with stocks. They all had, when they turned 18, we got them little stock accounts, and I let them just pick a company that they like, and they just bought the stock. And that way, it was just so that I put a little bit of money in there, not a lot, but just enough for them to see it. Some of my kids were like, they were like day traders, right? They had to watch it. I got the call, hey dad, it went down 12 cents. Oh my gosh, it's like Apple or something. It's like, went down 12 cents. Oh my gosh, now it's up 13 cents. Should I sell it? It's like, just let them get into it, right? Let them understand it. And once you start doing that, then okay, let's start talking about allocation. Let's talk about the difference between equities and debt and fixed income and things like that. But that takes a while because, quite frankly, it's going to take them a while to have that kind of money in order to do it.
And I just think, because I think that's so true with so many, doesn't matter really at what age you are, whatever new thing you're trying to learn, there's so much value, and you've got to learn the big concepts first and get your head around those, get comfortable with them, and then you can start adding other things on, and you can start adding in more detail if it's important or if you want to, right? But oftentimes you don't necessarily need to. You can reach financial independence, by being really simple. Like, you know what? I'm going to save, as much as I can so that I can invest it. I'm going to put it in a whole market fund and not think about it. And I'm just going to let it sit there, and I'm going to dump more money into that. And I don't care about any other details. I don't want to watch it. I'm not going to check the stock prices because I know it's going to go up over time. And if you do that and you're consistent about it, right? Back to being consistent over time, you'll get there, and you don't have to know any more than that. On the other hand, man, if you want to try and optimize and you really kind of like doing it, well, then you can really get into, I mean, it's endless, right? How much detail with financial stuff you can go into. So it just depends what lights you up and what interests you. And, that's something else that you mentioned in the book. And this is something that I say also, and I think is so important, is that there's no one right path for anybody. Everybody's path is different. And in fact, if you're trying to follow somebody else's path, then it's probably not going to work out as well as you would like, because you've got to chart your own path. Now, that doesn't mean you can't learn from other people and maybe sort of, go down part of the path that they took as a way to get started. But eventually you've got to make some changes, or you'll make some new pathways of your own. And that's just true for all of us. So there's no one right way to do anything, and certainly not with finances. So, and it's, I know you brought that up in the book. So I think I just wanted to highlight that because I think that's so important.
Yeah, well, that comes back to that sort of, to thine own self be true, right? It's a Shakespeare quote. And so not to be geeky out here, it's a financial podcast, not a literary one, but it is important that these kids know, right? And that comes back to the same thing, which is understanding what's real and what's fake, and understanding that not all of your friends have $10 million portfolios, right? And they're, it's like not a lot of people do. So let's, be realistic to what you have, and let's focus on you. The other thing I would highly recommend, which got my kids excited, was I put them on I wanted them to understand the concept of present value and future value, right? And it can be a technical concept, even for biochem majors, right? They don't want to hear it because it's numbers. But once you get past the basics, putting them in a calculator online and saying, here, you put in $10 every month, and let's just say you can get 5%. I'm just going to say 5%, or let's say 10%, whatever it is. Look how much you'll make. And they started playing with the numbers. And it's almost like gamification of where they think they're going to be. And I really do believe that young adults, and I think all people for that matter, you like to sort of see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? Hey, why am I working every day? It's to one day maybe retire and live on a fishing boat. Whatever it is, we like to have that, and we need that. And your kids or your young adults are very much the same way. Right? They've gone through all this school, they've done all this stuff. They still don't really know what they're going to do, what they want, but they know they want something. And seeing this, like visualize, oh, wait a second. Wow, so if I do that, so the more I save, then start doing the budgeting, right? And then start saying, wow, because now their savings goes from, the $10 a month to maybe it's $50. And they start to see how a little bit here, a little bit of sacrifice here. Yeah, maybe we don't need to eat out twice a week. Maybe we just eat once. How that goes into, wait a second, if I don't eat this Chipotle burrito or bowl this week and next all month long, and I'll still do it, but I'll just reduce once. That could be worth thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for me. Yeah, I think I'll do that.
That's where I think having a visual can be really important, because then you can start to see it. Because once you get that bug, once you see that and you get it, you're like, oh. And then, because especially if you've worked enough, or you're working a job, you get out of college, for example, you get a job and you're working a job and you thought it was going to be great, and you're like, this job's okay, but I don't want to do this until 40 more years. Like, what other options do I have? And then if you can start to see, well, gosh, if I did a little bit less of this and a little bit less of that, because I like those things maybe, but I could enjoy them still, but also put money in here, and you start to connect how that works over time, then once you figure that out, then it's easy to get excited, and then you want to just do more and more. And that's where it's cool too, because that's where you really get into the intersection of, okay, now I've got to look at what does really matter to me. what do I want to spend money on because it makes my life better and brings me enough joy it's worth it? Because you don't want to you don't want to live some life of deprivation. But what things can I either do without that I really don't get that much out of and I'm just spending because I wasn't paying attention? Or what things can I maybe cut back on because I like them, but I could still get the enjoyment that I want, but do it less often so I have more money to put over here? And that's where then, right, you've got each person is figuring out their own solution to the puzzle and then trying to get to this point of first financial stability and then financial independence, because from there it's all about flexibility and options. And now you can take your life in whatever direction you want because you don't have to trade your time for money. And if you love your job and you want to keep doing that, then by all means do it. If there's other things you want to pursue that don't pay as much, but you, man, really want to do them, your daughter really wants to, I just want to, she gets to a point, let's say she's financially independent and she's, 35 or whatever it might be, and she really loves dogs and wants to just do a bunch of dog rescue stuff that doesn't really pay much money, or she's just going to do it on a volunteer basis, she'd be able to do that if that was really what lit her up, for example.
Right.
So, yeah. Yeah, but once you can see that,
Absolutely.
right, or help your kids see that, and help them understand compounding, or show them sort of a visual, or talk to them about the rule of 72 and how your money can double and all that sort of stuff. Because, right, I think our job is to help them understand it so that then they can decide, oh, I get it now. Okay, how do I want to get there? What's the path for me? Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yep, absolutely.
I'll put a link for the book in the show notes. So, Hey Dad, and it's available, I'm assuming, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everywhere. Okay.
Anywhere where you find good books. Yeah, so just go on there, and it's available. It makes a great graduation gift or a good read. And I really encourage feedback. So if you do get the book and you give it to somebody, you want to personalize it, I'd love to hear some of this stuff, right? And I've gotten everything from recipes to advice on things to do with your sheets to make them smell better. So everything in between. So it's wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. If people want to reach out to you how do they find you? Where can they get you?
So the best way is you can, if you're specific for the book, it's heydadbook.com. If it's for me, it's Rob Finlay, FINLAY.com. And that way you can see all the stuff I'm doing and everything. I'm on the social media channel. I've got Instagram, and my Instagram, I basically sort of show everybody what I do. I'm, either farming or doing something like that, or hanging out or working.
Yeah, let's talk about, I meant to ask you about that and I completely forgot. So just talk for just a couple minutes on the sustainable farming stuff that you're into.
So this takes my business background. So I bought a farm, and I've been in farming for quite a while. And I had a farm before, and this farm I was doing, before I had livestock, this farm was actually growing crops. And I started looking at it, and I had a couple old farmers who were there with me, and they're like, oh yeah, we just need to put this fertilizer on, and then the fertilizer grows, and we cut our crops, we sell it, and then we put more fertilizer on. And basically doing more research, I realized that all I'm doing is just basically removing everything from the soil. I'm killing everything. If I've got bugs, I put fungicide or a pesticide on it. If I got fungus, I got fungicide. And yet I started to realize, and doing more research and study, how much is actually needed. Where what we really are is we're soil farmers. We're not growing crops. We have to be responsible for the soil. If you look where we haven't touched, it grows, right? There's stuff growing. But if we do our own sort of work with it, and we're putting this in, and back to this business side, I was basically putting all these chemicals into the soil, what they call fertilizers, and I put it in the soil, and what I took off was basically almost all the money that I put in. And it was like, this makes no financial sense. Like how can we survive by doing this? And so it just came down to, there are ways to work on the soil. And so that's what I've done. So I've really focused on creating the biology. So I have a company called Finlay Biodiversity. And what we do is we actually extract good microorganisms and fungi from soil, and we put that back into, so we take healthy soil and we can replicate what's good, and we put it back onto the soil in a liquid amendment so that it's easily absorbed and we can spread it. We get an exponential return, right? So a pound of soil of good biology could create 500 pounds of good amendment that I can put out on the soil. And so it's just exponential return, and it's a much more natural, it's a much more holistic way. And so what we're trying to do now is we're trying to replicate the process so that we can do that mass market. We can really do it mass scale. And because you don't need to do a lot of research. If you're a farmer and you have a small garden, you know the benefit of good compost and good soil, right? I mean, everybody knows that. And that's sort of the key of what we're trying to do on a large and even a small scale.
That's really cool, man. And so, you've got, so if people want to know a little bit more about that, then they can find that on your Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram, or go to robfinlay.com. It's got all of my stuff on.
Again, I'll put all that stuff in the show notes. So Rob, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for writing the book. I mean, so far I think it's great. I'm excited to finish reading it. So I encourage people to grab a copy. And like you said, right, write your own advice in there for your kids if you're going to give it to them. So thanks a lot, Rob, for coming on.
Dominic, thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the FI for Kids podcast. Please support the show by hitting subscribe and receive new episodes every Thursday. The intro and exit music this episode are courtesy of Douglas Cameron. As always, you can find links to the FI for Kids music in the show notes. Thanks again, and we'll talk next week.
You're like the horizon. I can't reach you, you're so far away. And if I run to the place I want you to stay, you'd be gone. I'd be left wondering why you moved on, and why you never said goodbye. I can't wait any longer. I see the writing on the wall. It's time for us to say, tomorrow we are yesterday. Tomorrow we are yesterday. You're like the sunset. You're glowing bright, but you're fading. And what I don't get is why I'm left here waiting. But I'm like a phoenix. I'm rising from this fire. It's something we can't fix. I guess it's time for us to retire. I can't